Well, we finally made it. It's the very last episode of the first 14th and 40th season of Doctor Who. Somehow it seems fitting that a show about time travel is so messed up when it comes to series numbers. Over the last week, speculation has piled on top of speculation, and we also saw a brand new Tales from the TARDIS, where we encountered the Pyramids of Mars, the original story that brought us Sootek the Destroyer. That episode asked a very simple question. Now that Sootek is a full-size Titan, what can the Doctor do to stop it? All of those answers and more we will discover, which of course means that this video will contain spoilers. You have been warned. I nearly said you have been warmed. Maybe you've been warmed as well, I'm not sure. If you have, make sure that you're not sitting on somebody's hand. It's now time to delve into the Empire of Death as we go beyond the sofa. Hello again, and for the final time this season. It's been a little bit of a roller coaster ride, let's face it. And we've had some amazing episodes, some that didn't quite work for me, some that are likely to go down in history as being a pinnacle of the show. In time, we will all sit down and dissect that as a fandom, but until then, the only questions that we really have are what's happening in the very last episode of Ncuti Gatwa's first season. Before we get into that, I want to do a little bit of talking about viewing figures again. Something interesting happened over the last couple of weeks, and there are some things that we should be aware of. Firstly, the audience share last week was abysmal. It was just 16%. And this is not good at all. As much as I want the show to succeed, it doesn't help if we're not being honest about this. 16% is well below what a normal show should get if it's going to be kept on air with the same budget. But something's happened with the ratings of Rogue, and that it's got more viewers for Rogue in the 7th day period and catch up than previous episodes had. It turned out to be one of the higher episodes in the series, whereas it did start off from a very low base for the terrestrial viewing figures. So I'd be interested to see what happens with the just over 2 million views that Legend of Ruby Sunday got. Moreover, with Doctor Who being less of a linear presentation now, we might see a boost in ratings after the end of Empire of Death. Have people been waiting for 2 weeks to see both of the episodes side by side? Who knows? The question of streaming and binge watching isn't something that we've really had to talk about much with Doctor Who in the past. Now it really is playing into the streaming model, what with it being released at midnight in the UK. The thing is, that might also lead to a different sort of viewing. I know what it's like with other series. I can wait until they're over. I don't have to watch them straight away because I'm not really that plugged into the fandom for something like, I don't know, Star Trek Picard. You can really spoil those shows for somebody who's watching every nuance, but you can't spoil them for me because I'm not actually looking for the information, And that means that much of the time I'll wait until a series is completely ended. Something that, it could take many months for me to come back to a series and watch it, because sometimes I forget it's been released, But I will sit and I'll watch the whole thing all in one go, and we'll see if that same sort of behaviour happens with Doctor Who. Only time will tell. One thing's for sure, the terrestrial rating might not be good, but ratings from various sources are showing that Doctor Who is one of the most watched programmes of the night. In a recent chart, it was the most watched scripted drama. Technically, not the most watched drama, as that goes to soap operas, but soap operas are often put into a different part of the television landscape. They're always given their own category. I think they call it returning dramas or recurring dramas, something like that. The point is that they are always seen as something different, and they are treated differently as well. Now, if Doctor Who can keep doing that, that's going to be something pretty special. It's important to remember that those charts are actually over a period of a whole week, not just a single night. If you look at Saturday on its own, the day that Rogue was released, it was the most watched show of the day. And that is with only 3.52 million viewers. You know, when people say that the TV landscape's changed, this is an illustration of it. 3.52 million is not a good number in terms of viewing figures for Doctor Who. Even things like Have I Got News for You are pulling in 4 to 5 million viewers. Doctor Who should be able to hold its own against those series. But to be the top-rated show on a Saturday night is still something to shout about. It'll definitely be interesting to see what happens with the consolidated next week and what happens with the 28-day figures as well. In 28 days' time, we will get the 28-day viewing figures. This tends to pick up people who have binged watched the series or have been a little bit slow off the mark in starting to watch. So we should see a bump in the viewing figures of some level, but it'll be interesting to see where the people are binging the series, or maybe if people just drop, maybe the viewership just drops off because people are no longer interested in it over that period of time. Either of those things can happen. Neither is necessarily a death rattle for the show. And as always, the caveat that I want to tell people is that we don't know what the BBC's tracking and what they think is important. And, you know, what will keep the show on air and what won't, we've got no idea about those things. We also saw the new Tales from the TARDIS, where the Doctor and Ruby are in a memory TARDIS, and the Doctor tells her the story of Pyramids of Mars. And this has been re-edited and updated with some special effects. And I've got to say, I quite liked it. I was a little bit down on the release of the Daleks in colour, especially because of the editing, but this is an awful lot better, and they've done a much better job. I'll do a full review of that at some point, but until then, if you haven't seen it, or if you wanted to watch it again, this isn't a bad way to experience the story. So with all that out of the way, we can finally sit back and talk about the season finale. It's time to enter the Empire of Death. I've got to say, I found this whole thing a little underwhelming. There were things in here that I really liked and things that just didn't quite work for me. I think the pacing was a little bit all over the place, and that's something that I've taken an issue with before with Russell T Davies's writing. But I think that the big thing that's making me feel like this is a sense that we were sold on one thing and that we got something completely different. So Sootek is in the control room at UNIT, and his minions unleash the Sand of Death, which kills everybody in the known universe. And that's it. End of show. I mean, of course it isn't, but that's the most deadly that we have ever seen Sootek. Even in the original Pyramids of Mars, he didn't actually have that much power, mostly, of course, because he was trapped in the pyramid for much of that story. So he used his minions and the robots to do all of his dirty work. And that worked quite well, because you might have this nearly all-powerful being, but you've curtailed his ability to act. And it means that the character ends up being something that you think that the Doctor can overcome. Not that he's easy to defeat by any stretch of the imagination, and it's clear that the Doctor is in great danger throughout a lot of Pyramids of Mars, but you get the idea that what's happening is not insurmountable. That should be the exact opposite with what we have here, because Sootek has destroyed the universe. Most of the people are dead, and those that aren't are slowly dying. The only two living people in existence are the Doctor and Ruby, once we get past the point of Mel dying. Anyway, she dies during the episode. If you didn't know and weren't expecting spoilers, I did say. And yet, I didn't feel that Sootek was a threat. At least some of this is down to the pacing and the relatively short run times that we've had for the series. It's a completely different beast to a 4-part story that was told in the 1970s, because they had a little bit more wiggle room to play around with the plots and the characters and to get something more out of it. But there were some things that I really did like. I think Mel's character is great. The fact that she's used as a patsy by Sootek is great. I enjoyed the moped chase through London. I liked seeing the memory TARDIS, and this is where it comes from. This is where it ties into the series. That is fantastic. I loved the bit at the end when Ruby had to say goodbye to the Doctor. The character moments in this, when they happen, are really good. They're really solid. Actually, thinking about the action sequences, I thought those worked really well too. The moment that the Doctor is dragging Sootek through the time vortex worked really well for me. And it was great seeing the Doctor hanging out of the side of the TARDIS yelling at the bad guy. I liked that. Let's see more of that in the future, please. But a lot of this seems to miss the mark. I think it started well, and it had some really nice callbacks to the rest of the series, especially 73 Yards, which I thought could easily have been an episode that was completely disjointed from the rest of the show. I wasn't sure of the point of the Spoon Woman. Technically, she's a stakes character, but she dies, and so therefore she has no stakes for the majority of the episode. She's really there just to show that what we knew had happened before has been reversed. But I think we actually knew that anyway, and I'm not sure that that added too much overall to the episode. I think the main problem with this is that you have a protagonist, or rather an antagonist, who doesn't actually do anything much. He uses his minions to do all of the dirty work. So where's the fear in being a giant Egyptian god if he's not actually going to do anything to you? It's his servant you need to worry about. I mean, let's face it, we could all outrun his servants. Okay, maybe I couldn't outrun his servants, but you get the idea that somebody could get away from them instead of having to deal with the whole death thing. I wanted to see Sootek actually wielding some of the power that we barely got to see him wield in Pyramids. We don't quite get that. One small moment where he cripples the Doctor for a short time, but nothing to write home about. He also spends all of this time wrapped around the TARDIS. Now, there's probably a good reason for it. It's probably got something to do with budgets and not being able to afford giant CG monsters on the screen all the time, which is fair, but good writers write around technical limitations. And it seems in this instance that the technical limitation has just been left to fester. What was the point of seeing Sootek the Titan when we could have seen Sootek the man-sized god, as he was in the 1975 show, who could actually have some agency of his own and perform some of the actual actions within the narrative? So that was a bit of a letdown. And couple that with the reveal of Ruby's mother, and I think that we had another bit of a letdown. You have a season arc which is grounded in the mystery of who Ruby is. And why does it always snow when she's around? Instead of getting a satisfying answer to that, we find out that actually Ruby is nobody. Her mother is nobody. She's only become important because we have placed importance upon her. The only problem is we didn't do anything. Russell T Davies placed importance upon her, and she's acted like a Chekhov's gun throughout the whole series. And unfortunately, with Empire of Death, Chekhov's gun did not go off, and that's one of the major mistakes that writers are told to avoid from a very early age. I suppose I'm a bit torn at that point because I didn't mind the resolution that Ruby isn't anybody important, that her mother is just a normal human being. What I mind is the bait and switch. It's why this episode and a good chunk of the season ended up not landing for me, I'm afraid, because this was meant to be the big payoff. This was meant to be the reason why you stick around with the series for 8 whole episodes, and yet it's just a bit of a throwaway thing. You think at that point, well, at least there's the mystery of Mrs. Flood, but it appears that that's going to be held over until at least the next season, if not further away than that. It meant the whole thing felt quite unsatisfying. But there's a modicum of hope in there. The performances were excellent, as they have been throughout the whole series. One thing did annoy me, though, and it's the Doctor crying yet again. We get it twice in this episode. And if this is a character trait, then it just feels like it's gone on enough. At one point, I thought that it must lead to something. It must be some sort of plot point that's happening around the Doctor crying all the time. It can't just be that that's his character. And I didn't mind it when it was, in Boom, when it was in Dot and Bubble, when it was something that didn't happen all the time with each and every week on screen. Because every time we see it, the effect of it gets lesser and lesser. It loses its dramatic impact because it becomes something that isn't a unique moment where a character is being the most vulnerable that they could possibly be. It's something that happens every single week. It's not a special thing anymore. Perhaps that's the point, I don't know, but it's not a particularly good point. whilst I'm disappointed about how the episode actually turned out, I do wonder if this was mostly because of the shortened episode length or having episodes run at 45 to 50 minutes. But there needs to be a point in a series where you get some satisfying conclusions, and I just didn't think that we got there yet. I know part of the fun in a fandom is, guessing what's going to happen next. I just didn't expect that the person who would be telling us to guess would be the guy who's meant to be resolving the questions in the show. I think perhaps I'd be a little bit happier with this not revealing who Mrs. Flood is if we got a more satisfying conclusion to Ruby's story. And that feels like a very awkward thing to say. It's difficult because in many respects, Ruby's story did have a very satisfying conclusion. She finds her family, even if they're not a proper family anymore, or, maybe they will be in the future. That doesn't really matter. She's found them and she's going on that journey. If this was a family drama, you couldn't have asked for a better ending than that. The problem is, it isn't. The problem is, this is a science fiction fantasy series which is meant to be full of action. And even though we had a good chunk of action in this episode, we didn't get resolutions that were satisfying. For example, the woman pointing at the Doctor, at the TARDIS, at whatever it was, turns out to be pointing at a sign for Ruby Road. We all saw the way that she was pointing, right? It wasn't like she was gesturing. It was almost as bad as Donald Sutherland in Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It just doesn't ring true. It's not how somebody would point to a sign when they just left their baby to be looked after by the church. Ultimately, I really wanted to like this a lot more than I did. And the brilliant bits in there, and there were brilliant bits. I don't want to leave people thinking that I didn't enjoy anything from the episode. I did. But those brilliant bits were all overshadowed by a wholly unsatisfying conclusion. That's what I think anyway. Do let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm sure some of you loved it. If you did, then I'm very pleased for you, because I don't want people to hate this show. And I really hope that even, with an episode that I don't like, it can find its audience out there. Anyway, that's it from me. That's it from this particular video. I'll be back, possibly not next week, because I've got a massive product launch coming up. When I do come back, though, I think I'm going to do a review of the new Pyramids of Mars, Tales from the TARDIS, which I really enjoyed. And I want to take an overview of the whole series at some point and maybe try and get some different people in and have a chat with them about it. But we'll see. It all depends on what can be achieved. I'll have to wait and see, because everything, of course, will have to work around the rest of my life. Until next time, thanks ever so much for watching. Thank you for making it to the end of the video, and I do hope that you will come along and join me next time that we go Beyond the Sofa.